Hello, and welcome to the National Archives Foundation's virtual program series. I'm Patrick Madden, the Executive Director of the Foundation. We're the nonprofit partner to the National Archives. Through this foundation programming, we're pleased to open the virtual doors of the National Archives and share the holdings, more than 15 billion records, objects, films, letters, drawings, photographs, and most importantly, stories from our nation's past. The National Archives Museum in Washington, D.C. is open, so please visit nationalarchivesfoundation.org to stay up to date or follow us on social media. In fact, right now, click on that subscribe button on YouTube and help us grow our network. Thank you for joining us today from home for another history-inspired conversation. This is a live program, and our guest speaker will be taking your questions later in the program, so please use your YouTube chat to put your questions in. And right now, we want you to use the chat box. Let us know where you're watching from. Put in your hometown and state, and we'll give you a shout out later in the program. Tonight's program is a celebration of Jackie Robinson and the anniversary of the 75 years of him breaking the color barrier in baseball. The National Archives has a terrific featured document display up right now for the public, and we're thrilled you've joined us for this program. Allow me now to introduce our moderator for today's program, the Honorable Rodney Slater. Rodney is a senior partner at Squire Patton Boggs and former U.S. Secretary of Transportation. As Secretary of Transportation under Bill Clinton, he passed several historic legislative initiatives, including the Transportation Equity Act for the 21st century and the Wendell H. Ford Aviation Investment Reform Act. He has held several other high-level positions in the federal and state government and academia. He's the chairman of Squire Patton Boggs Foundation and founding partner of the Washington, D.C. Nationals baseball team and the chair emeritus of the Washington, D.C. Nationals Youth Baseball Academy. Probably most importantly, he is one of my bosses as the vice chair of the National Archives Foundation Board of Directors. And also I want to welcome Bruce Markinson. Bruce is with the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. He is a leader in the education department where he teaches students through virtual field trips. He has extensive media experience as both a broadcaster and a writer. In addition to his education role, he narrates many of the Hall of Fame's video productions. His books and work on the history of baseball has earned him numerous accolades and awards. Bruce has been with the Hall for nearly a decade and has lots to share with us tonight. Rodney and Bruce, are you there?
Here, Patrick. Thank you.
Excellent. And we'll just wait for Rodney to jump in.
Yes, we're here. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, I'm going to pass the program over to you so you can jump right in.
Bruce, are you there?
I'm here, Rodney. Yes. How are you?
Doing well. We're all looking forward to your presentation and excited that you've joined us this evening. So let me just turn it to you. And again, thank you for your great work, and we're excited to have you. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Rodney. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak to you and, of course, to all the other folks watching today. It is 75 years after Jackie Robinson debuted for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. And while he was not the first Black player in Major League history, there were a number of Black players who played in the 19th century. He was the first Black major leaguer of the 20th century, and he was the man to end this color barrier, the color ban that had been in place from 1887 until 1947. When you talk about a ball player having a cultural impact, it's probably not a player any more important in history than Jackie Robinson. He was a Hall of Famer, he was a trailblazer, civil rights hero, he was all of those things. And this evening we'll learn a little bit more about him, his career, and his accomplishments. He was born Jack Roosevelt Robinson, January 31st, 1919, in a town called Cairo, Georgia. He was the youngest of 5 children. He and his family moved to Southern California in 1920 when he was only 1 year of age. By then, Robinson's father had already left the family. He was now raised by his mother, Mally. Robinson and his family lived in a neighborhood that had mostly white residents. Robinson and his family often bombarded with insults by some neighbors, people coming through the neighborhood. Sometimes neighbors actually called the police on the Robinsons, even though they had actually done nothing wrong. Eventually, the relationship between the neighbors and the Robinson family became better, became stronger, as some of these neighbors began to accept the fact that there was a Black family in their neighborhood. Now, it was during his high school years that Jackie Robinson really emerged as a top flight athlete. Athletics also gave him an opportunity to make friends with some of his classmates, including his white classmates. He then attended Pasadena Junior College. And it was after attending Pasadena that his athletic abilities earned him a scholarship to the University of California at Los Angeles, or as we more commonly refer to it, UCLA. He lettered in 4 different sports: basketball, football, track and field, and of course, baseball. This might come as surprising to some, but there are a number of people that saw Robinson in his various sports who actually believed that he was a better football player in college than he was a baseball player. But as it turned out, I think he probably made the right decision going with baseball, given his success there. Robinson attended UCLA through his junior year. He left at that point primarily because of family obligations. He felt that he should go into business, wanted to earn money for his family. They could certainly use the support. He wanted to do that. Then we have the onset of World War II. And in 1942, Jackie Robinson was drafted into the US Army. Now, he later on would sign with the Kansas City Monarchs. That was in 1945. He played shortstop. He appeared in 47 games for the Monarchs and did exceedingly well. He batted .387 with 5 home runs, 13 stolen bases. Certainly made quite an impression on those who saw him play. In 1945, Branch Rickey, the president and part owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, really became determined to end the color barrier, which had been in place since the mid-1880s, as we mentioned earlier. And certainly one of the players who drew Rickey's interest was Jackie Robinson. At one point, Branch Rickey dispatched one of his top scouts, one of his top lieutenants, a man named Clyde Sukeforth. Sukeforth met with Robinson. He was actually supposed to watch him play, but the game did not happen that day. It was postponed. But Sukeforth very wisely still met with Robinson, talked to him, came away very impressed with Jackie's character, his personality. And when he reported back to Branch Rickey, he told him that he was very impressed by this young man and basically gave his own recommendation that Rickey sign Robinson. And that's exactly what Robinson ended up doing. Now, in terms of why Branch Rickey wanted to end the color barrier, it was really twofold. Number one, he was morally opposed to the color line. He did feel that it was morally wrong. He felt that this was overdue to be changed. It was time to change baseball. But there also was a practical consideration that Branch Rickey had. He believed that if he started signing top Black talent out of the Negro Leagues, Jackie Robinson, other players, this would give him an advantage over other National League owners who were unwilling to sign Black players. And he felt, from a practical standpoint, this was going to make his team better, more competitive. It was going to give them an edge. So that was yet another factor. So it really was a twofold reason. Here we see a photograph of Rickey and Robinson signing his contract. He actually officially signed in the fall of 1945. In 1946, he reported to Montreal. The Montreal Royals were the top affiliate of the Dodgers, minor league team in the International League. And he played the entire 1946 season with Montreal and then came to the major leagues in 1947. Now, when Branch Rickey talked to Jackie about signing with the team, he tried to lay out the scenario as best he could, as accurately as he could. And he told him this was going to be very difficult. He did not make it seem like this was going to be easy. There were going to be insults. There was going to be bigotry, hatred, threats. And he also wanted to make it clear to Jackie that it was very important that Jackie, at least initially, would not retaliate against any of the bigots who called him names, who insulted him, tried to pick fights with him. Rickey felt that for the first few years of Jackie's career, it was important not to fight back, that would make a good impression on fans. Fans would see this man being tormented with these insults and yet see that, he had the courage not to fight back, that he was, in a sense, willing to take it and not stoop to the level of those who were trying to bait him into fights and arguments. Rickey talked about the scenario ahead with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and I want to quote from what Branch Rickey said. "We'll be in a tough position. We can win only if I convince the world that I'm doing this because you're a great ball player and a fine gentleman. If you're a good enough man, we can make this a start in the right direction. But let me tell you, it's going to take an awful lot of courage." And it absolutely did. Now, when we examine the reasons why Branch Rickey selected Jackie Robinson, it's fairly complicated. There was no one single factor that was the main reason. There were a lot of things that went into the equation. Jackie Robinson was not necessarily the best player in the Negro Leagues. There were players who were more established, more experienced, more proven. He was a standout player, a very talented young player. But there were other players who had had longer careers, more success, players like Monty Irvin. But Rickey did recognize that, yeah, Jackie had phenomenal athletic talent. Go back to his days at UCLA, those 3 years at the University of California at Los Angeles. Robinson not only played baseball, he played basketball, he played football, and he was also a standout in track and field. So yes, he did have a strong athletic resume in his favor. But there were other factors that were involved as well. Rickey knew that whoever he selected as the man to break this color barrier that was in place since 1887, this would have to be a man of character, a man of courage, someone who was mentally tough. He preferred somebody who was college educated. He knew that Jackie had been to UCLA for 3 years. He understood that Jackie had left to start a business and to support his family financially. He wanted somebody that was well-spoken, that could handle media interviews, media requests. He felt that was an important part of the job as well. There was another factor as well that Rickey really recognized and understood. He knew that Jackie had experience in the military. He had enlisted in the U.S. Army during World War II. In fact, he had become an officer. He had become a lieutenant. And as it turned out, Robinson would become involved in a very interesting piece of civil rights history that would foreshadow another civil rights pioneer. Now, we should mention as well, Robinson throughout his military career served with a distinction, never saw combat, but he did accumulate a good record, did, as I say, become a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. Now, it was while he was serving the Army that he did become involved in a racially charged incident. And it was something very similar to what happened to Rosa Parks roughly a decade later. It was 1955. As I'm sure many of you know, Rosa Parks made history refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger on a public bus. She essentially took a stand against this. She was arrested, charged with a crime, not treated particularly well by the justice system. But her situation gained sympathy. People really became appalled at how poorly she was treated in this situation. And it actually led to significant changes in the Montgomery, Alabama bus system, which had been a heavily segregated system and would soon become desegregated because of Rosa Parks. Well, in 1944, Jackie Robinson essentially did something very similar. He had boarded a military bus and he was wearing his military outfit, his lieutenant's uniform. He saw there was an open seat in the front of the bus, so he sat there. Now, the bus driver, nasty individual, said to Jackie, "Well, you're black, you're going to have to sit in the back of the bus." Robinson then tried to explain to this driver that, well, this is a military bus. As you can see, I'm a lieutenant in the United States Army. I should be able to sit wherever there is an open seat. So Robinson and the bus driver proceeded to get into a very heated argument. The bus driver filed a complaint against Jackie, and essentially Jackie was now faced with criminal charges. And the case went to military court. And at the military court, Robinson was found not guilty on all the charges. Now, here we have something very interesting that kind of ties in our museum, the Baseball Hall of Fame, to the National Archives. This letter that you see here is not at the Hall of Fame, but it is currently on display. It's in the East Rotunda at the National Archives. And it's a letter that Robinson wrote to the Secretary of War shortly after this incident on the military bus took place. He was explaining his side of the story. The trial then took place. Robinson was found not guilty on the charges. Well, Branch Rickey knew about all of this, and he admired the courage Robinson had shown in standing up for his own personal rights, his own civil rights. He admired this toughness that Robinson exhibited. And it was another factor in why Branch Rickey selected Jackie Robinson to break the color barrier. So it was April 15th, 1947. Robinson made his major league debut for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He played first base that day, went 1 for 3. Over the course of his career, he'd become better known as a second baseman. But during that first year, he played a lot of first base. He also filled in at some of the other infield positions. Now, if you think it was a case of Robinson being universally accepted by his Brooklyn Dodger teammates right from the start, that was not the case at all. Initially, and this is going back to spring training, this is going back to March 1947. Initially, some of his teammates with the Dodgers, they wanted no part of Robinson. They told Dodgers management they did not want to play with a black man as their teammate. And of course, as Jackie proceeded to play during that season, some opponents shouted insults at him. They slid into second base with their cleats high as a way of intentionally trying to hurt him. Some pitchers even threw at his head, again, intentionally. Here's a photo, and this is actually a little bit later in Jackie's career. This took place during the 1952 season. It was a Dodgers-Cubs game at Ebbets Field, home of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And you can see Jackie leaping into the air as he attempts to make a double play against the base runner for the Cubs. Now, we don't know in this specific case if this was intentionally a case of the base runner trying to spike him. It could have been by accident, but there were certainly situations during Jackie's career, especially early, but even at times later, where base runners did come in with their spikes high. They were trying to cut him in the legs. They were trying to injure him intentionally. So this was something that Jackie faced. One of the things that Jackie faced that was even more frightening was hate mail. And this was hate mail that came into Branch Rickey periodically throughout his career. This one came in a few years into Jackie Robinson's career. This did not happen in his rookie year of 47. It was likely 48 or 49 when this letter was sent to him. And I'll read it to you, even though it's pretty harsh to hear what's said here. Note, we have already got rid of several like you. One was found in river just recently. The letter goes on to say, more directly, Robinson, we are going to kill you if you attempt to enter a ball game at Crosley Field. It's signed the Travelers. Now, who are the Travelers? The Travelers were a racist organization based in the Midwest. They were essentially a smaller version of the KKK, less famous, but in some ways just as brutal. So this is a death threat. It starts out hinting at trouble, talking about we have already got rid of several like you, as in other Black people, one found floating in the river. And then it becomes much more direct and comes out and says, we're going to kill you if you attempt to enter a ball game at Crosley Field, and that's the home of the Cincinnati Reds. Robinson faced a dilemma, what to do here in this situation. If I play, I can put myself in harm's way. You know, who knows whether these people will carry out this threat. So this could be very dangerous. On the other hand, if Robinson did not play, if he sat out these games, this series at Crosley Field, and people found out about it, well, in some ways that could hurt the cause for other Black players wanting to come into the major leagues. It could hurt the cause in a more general sense. Now, if you know anything about Jackie Robinson and the toughness, the courage that he exhibited, you know that he didn't give in to the haters, the bigots. And he did end up playing that series at Crosley Field. Thankfully, nothing happened. The Travelers never followed through on this awful death threat. So Robinson certainly received his share of hate mail. He did receive some letters of support as well. And like the death threat, which is part of our collection here at the Baseball Hall of Fame, this far more supportive letter is also part of the Hall of Fame's collection. I'll read it to you. It's written by a young fan named Carl, well, not so young fan, an adult named Carl M. Vining. And Carl wrote to Jackie, I've never written to a ball player before, although I have been a fan for 20 years. I am simply an American who is ashamed of the things my race has done and is doing to your race. We are all Americans and created equal. And I am sick at heart of the things that are happening. You have been a credit to your people and have taken more than I could in your place. I just wanted to wish you all the luck and happiness for you and your family in the years to come. So there were some of these letters of support, although it's probably likely the hate mail far outweighed the supportive letters. And in some cases, Branch Rickey didn't even want to show the hate mail to Jackie because of the very violent nature of what was said. But I imagine when Jackie saw some letters like this that were so positive, so supportive, it did give him a little bit of encouragement. Now, as Jackie continued in his major league career, he really began to win over the American public. They recognized him as a strong family man with good family values. Here's a great photo of Jackie with his wife, Rachel, and their 3 children. Many white fans, they saw that Jackie was very similar to them. Family man, strong moral values that they shared. Robinson became popular with fans, both in Brooklyn and in other locations. There's a great photo that we have here at the Hall of Fame that actually shows him meeting some fans in the Caribbean. During spring training one year, the Dodgers went to Latin America. And even in Latin America, Jackie was exceedingly well known, and he signed autographs during that tour of the Caribbean. Robinson appeared on the covers of national magazines like Life and Time magazine. He really became a tremendous national celebrity. I'm going to show you some of those images in a moment, but I want to talk first about the relationship that he developed with his shortstop, Pee Wee Reese. Now, Pee Wee was the Dodgers' mainstay at shortstop, a Hall of Famer. Jackie would eventually become the Dodgers' full-time second baseman. So for a number of years, they formed the Dodgers double play combination. But more importantly, these two men essentially became best of friends. There had been people who had said that the integration of baseball is not going to work. You can't have black and white players on the same team. They're not going to get along. There are going to be arguments. Well, Reese and Robinson showed that that was nonsense. Showed not only could they get along, they could become the best of friends. Now, Reese had grown up in Kentucky, in the American South, in Jim Crow territory, essentially, but he didn't agree with any of that. He was somebody that was far more progressive. He believed in treating people equally. Skin color was not something that he would look to as a weapon. So he was completely against the Jim Crow integration, or segregation, I should say, that was taking place in states like Kentucky. So these two men became the best of friends, and they really remained so, not only for the rest of their careers in Brooklyn, but also up until Jackie's death in 1972. Here's that photograph I was talking about earlier, Robinson signing an autograph book for some fans in the Caribbean. And you can see how they've gathered around the front row, and also looks like some members of the media gathered in the dugout as well. So he was not only known here in America, but he was really known throughout the baseball world, throughout Latin America as well. Late in the 1947 season, he appeared on the cover of Time magazine. Also at one point, he appeared on the cover of Life magazine. Really became a national celebrity. He was somebody that was exceedingly well known, not just to baseball fans, but really to even people that didn't follow the game all that closely. They knew the name of Jackie Robinson. It was a name that transcended sport. It was a name that was becoming a part of American popular mainstream culture. And that's something that Robinson was able to achieve, especially over time with the Dodgers. Robinson retired in 1957, and then after sitting out the mandatory 5-year waiting period, he became eligible for the Hall of Fame. He received just over 77% of the vote. You need 75% to get in. So he was able to achieve that threshold. 1962, when he was elected and inducted into the Hall of Fame. This is a photograph from the Hall of Fame induction ceremony that summer. It's a great photo. That's Branch Rickey on the left, and of course, Jackie's wife, Rachel, on the right. Jackie accepting his plaque, which would soon take its place in. Now, even after Jackie retired from baseball, he remained very active in the American Civil Rights Movement. He also became involved in the political world as well. He would regularly attend sit-ins, protests, conferences, where he would speak about his experiences, not only in baseball, but his general real-life experiences dealing with bigotry, trying to overcome some of these obstacles. Some of the things that Jackie did in terms of his political activism in 1960, he campaigned for presidential candidate Richard Nixon. 1966, Jackie Robinson was appointed special assistant to the governor by Nelson Rockefeller. 1968, Jackie was named national chairman of the Brotherhood Week for the National Conference of Christians. He also became a very successful businessman with the Chock full of Nuts Coffee Company. He helped start a bank for African Americans, also was involved in efforts to build housing for African Americans who were in need. Perhaps most significantly of these many post-baseball accomplishments, Robinson became a trusted advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., essentially the man who led the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. Here's a great photo of Dr. King and Jackie Robinson, and a copy of this photograph actually hangs in our library right next door to our education offices here at the Hall of Fame. You can see the quote on your screen from Martin Luther King talking about Jackie. Jackie Robinson made my success possible. Without him, I would never have been able to do what I did. Pretty powerful words coming from the man who led civil rights in America in the 1960s. Giving credit to Jackie, talking about how he came to rely on Jackie. Jackie was older than Dr. King. Robinson, of course, had directly experienced a lot of this bigotry in the 40s and 50s in terms of his baseball experiences. King knew that he could draw from that. He could learn from what Jackie Robinson had experienced. Now, Robinson also felt very strongly about Dr. King. In September of 1962, Robinson made these comments during a conference in Birmingham, Alabama. People used to tell me a lot of things about Dr. King, that he was trying to take over the world, that he was making money on the civil rights issues. I didn't believe them, of course. I knew this was a dedicated man and that he had made tremendous personal financial sacrifices in the cause. I sort of wondered why people would stoop to talk about him in such a way. Then I realized that the world has always talked against great men. The best way to keep from getting talked about is to do nothing. Going back just a few years earlier, a great photo here, 1957 at Howard University, all-black college. The university awarded Robinson and King honorary degrees. You can see them together during that ceremony. And if I can just move astride from the Robinson story for just a moment, another very interesting King connection to baseball, Martin Luther King and the game of baseball, is this man, Don Clendenin. Don Clendenin was a standout slugger for the Pittsburgh Pirates in the 1960s. As a younger man, he had starred in football, basketball, and baseball at Morehouse College, where his mentor was none other than school alumnus Martin Luther King. King was a close family friend, would become a very close friend of Don Clendenin. We jump ahead to opening day 1968. Clendenin learned about the assassination of King, his close friend, his former mentor. Faced with the prospect of playing their first two regular season games just days after the assassination, it was Clendenin and several other members of the Pirates who led an effort to postpone those opening day games. And that's why the Pirates and the rest of baseball eventually followed suit, thanks to what the Pirates did. Opening day games were canceled out of deference to the loss of Dr. King. Now, when we speak of Jackie Robinson at the Baseball Hall of Fame, we do have some artifacts from his career. These are some of the items that we have featured here. That's a cap that he wore during his Brooklyn Dodgers career. You'll also find here at the Hall of Fame a movie poster for a film, The Jackie Robinson Story, that came out in the early 1950s, actually starred Jackie Robinson as himself. Legendary actress Ruby Dee played his wife Rachel in the film. We also have a commemorative uniform that the Dodgers issued in 1972, which was the year when the Dodgers retired his number 42. Also here at the Hall of Fame, there are two plaques that we have in Cooperstown. And you might say two plaques, why two and not just one? Well, the one on the left is the original plaque, which was given or issued, I should say, in 1962. If you look at that plaque, you'll see there's a lot of information about Robinson's baseball career, a few statistical references, but absolutely no mention about him being the man to break the color barrier in 1947. That is not included in this. We believe that Jackie expressed his wish to the Hall of Fame that they really concentrate on his baseball playing in terms of what was written, the text on his plaque. But many years later, Jackie's widow, Rachel, this was back in 2008, she thought, as we get further and further away from Jackie breaking that color barrier, now 75 years ago, the young people coming up, maybe not as readily aware of what Jackie Robinson did. She wanted people visiting the Hall of Fame, seeing his plaque, to learn about what Robinson did in terms of integration, in terms of civil rights. So that is why this new plaque was created in 2008. It was completely rewritten, still has listings of many of his baseball accomplishments, but toward the end of the plaque, there is a sentence says he displayed tremendous courage and poise in 1947 when he integrated the modern major leagues in the face of intense adversity. So that change came at the behest of Rachel Robinson. So that's why there are two plaques. The one on the right, currently on display. The older plaque, the original from '62, is located in our archive, our collection here at the museum. You look at Jackie Robinson, his influence on American life and culture, so great that 50 years after his major league debut, this is 1997, he was honored by having his number universally retired by Major League Baseball. First player to have his number, 42, retired by all major league clubs, all 30 teams. That had never before been done for any player. Obviously, he has received many other honors. We've talked about his Hall of Fame induction. Also, for people that visit the Baseball Hall of Fame, when you first enter the main lobby, come in the front doors, there is a character and courage exhibit, features 3 statues, 3 great heroes, humanitarians. One is of Roberto Clemente, another of Lou Gehrig, the third is of Jackie Robinson. And of course, there is special recognition of Jackie Robinson throughout Major League Baseball. Every April 15th, Jackie Robinson Day is celebrated across the major leagues. When you talk about Jackie Robinson, you are not just talking about a baseball player. You're not just talking about a Hall of Famer. You are talking about a true and legitimate American hero, a civil rights pioneer and activist. And as I so often like to say to school groups that visit the Hall of Fame or do programs like this through virtual field trips, you cannot teach American history without teaching the story of Jackie Robinson. He is critical to the fabric of American history, certainly critical to the fabric of civil rights. So that's our presentation. We would like to take questions from you, which you can certainly pose to us. And to help us with that, Rodney Slater will help us handling some of those questions, comments that you may have. I imagine our discussion today has prompted some questions on your part about various aspects of Jackie's life. Jackie passed away in 1972 at the age of 53. He had been diabetic in his later years, suffered greatly with very poor health, and passed away at a relatively young age, 53 at the time. So any questions that you might have, we'd certainly be glad to hear them from you, and Mr. Slater will help us with that. Rodney?
Thank you, Bruce. And Bruce, let us just say again, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I don't know whether others had note cards. I did, and I basically filled them all with comments and information, and I enjoyed it immensely. We do have a few questions that have already come in. And before I do that, though, let me just mention Rachel Robinson again. I found it interesting, the comments you made about her, and especially the one made about her in 2008, where she basically, having survived her husband, said, look, this is something to preserve, the history that this individual made, the difference he made. And, you know, the movie, just a few years ago, really, I think it was 2012, 13 or so, with Chadwick Boseman and a young actress, Nicole Bahari, both of them not well known at all at the time, but a beautiful movie, really about a beautiful couple going through this process together. And I think that's something to underscore because as you know, Mr. Rickey might have said, look, you can't show it in public in the arena, at least not early on. We know that he was feeling it. And she was there to help him shoulder it. And so I just think emphasizing a little bit more that role that she played, as you did, very, very important. But would you care to say anything else just from your knowledge, maybe even after as far as working with her recently, because she's still alive, she's still with us, yes, and just as beautiful as always. So maybe a word or two, and then we'll get into our questions there.
Absolutely. Rachel Robinson has received one of the Hall of Fame's most prestigious awards It is the Buck O'Neill Lifetime Achievement Award. It is an award that is only given out once every 3 years. And she received it several years ago, came out to Cooperstown for the ceremony. And the awarding of the Buck O'Neill presentation is done during Hall of Fame weekend. So it's a very prestigious thing. And Rachel certainly a huge part of the Jackie story, giving him that moral support, which at various times he needed very badly. You know, Jackie was very proud, and he had a temper. And I'm sure that during those early years, when Branch Rickey told him, you can't retaliate against the haters, I'm sure that he burned to do just the opposite, that he wanted to retaliate. He wanted to tell some of these people off. He may have been tempted to, raise a hand because he was not one to sit by lightly when he was being attacked, when he was being treated unfairly. Now, after those first few years, Rickey did give him the permission, basically said the gloves can come off. If they're still giving you a hard time, you have the right to essentially at least argue back, if not fight back. And I'm sure that was a lot easier for Jackie to do. He did not suffer fools lightly. He was extremely proud. And when he heard these bigoted insults, when he heard these lies being said about him, it must have really torn at him. I mentioned a moment ago that, his official cause of death was a heart attack caused by diabetes. I really think, and there are many others who think as well, that his early death at age 53 was also partially caused by the stress and the strain of being the first Black player, having to listen to all this nonsense, having to deal with it. Also the pressure of having to succeed, because he knew that the weight of baseball's civil rights movement was hanging on his performance. If he failed, if he flopped, that was going to slow integration. That was going to delay opportunities for other Black players. So I think the pressure, the bigotry, the hatred, all were factors in Jack's passing.
Yes. And you mentioned Buck O'Neill. He's going into the Hall. We're excited about that, and very much appreciate that. I think we should also, just before we get into the questions, mention Sharon as well, Sharon Robinson, and the great work that she's doing. Her Breaking Barriers in Sports and in Life, a great program, and that's their daughter, and she's keeping the hope alive as well in that regard.
Yeah, she's very involved in the Jackie Robinson Foundation, as Rachel has had to give up some of those duties as she's gotten a bit older. Sharon has really stepped in. She's a motivational speaker. She has written books. She has done an awful lot to really try to promote, foster the legacy of her father. Also very accomplished in her own right as well. I had the pleasure of meeting Sharon a number of years ago when we did a program together here at the Hall of Fame, and it's one of the thrills of my baseball career, if you will.
Yes. And let's get, we're getting in some questions now, and really the first one actually talks about the relationship that Mr. Robinson had with Dr. King, and you talked about that, and it was very powerful. And the quote from Dr. King about his success being built on this great foundation set by Jackie. Dr. King had a philosophy of nonviolence too, which is quite interesting when you think about how Jackie had to fight his battles as well. Staying in control, that sort of thing. Have you thought just about that parallel between the two of them as well, clearly as they worked side by side in many respects?
I think they had a number of philosophical agreements, and I think there was a lot of common ground in terms of how they felt the civil rights movement should be handled and advanced in the 1960s. There were some disagreements as well. There was disagreement on the Vietnam War. King was opposed to it. Robinson was in favor of it. And, that was okay with Jackie. He didn't have to agree with you on every issue to be your friend, to be your ally, to be a counselor to that person. But that was one area where they disagreed on. But certainly They were both believers in kind of a peaceful protest manner.
Mhm.
In contrast to that, Jackie did not see eye to eye with Malcolm X. They went back and forth with each other. Jackie wrote some newspaper columns at the time and responded to some of the criticism that came his way from Malcolm X. So they were very much on opposite ends in terms of that civil rights approach. But yeah, for the most part, Jackie and Dr. King were very much on the same page.
Mhm. And then you also mentioned the relationship with Pee Wee Reese, and you know, uh, all of us, I think, have heard about that and have applauded it, but some wish to not believe it. But you've got some insight about how it's true. Could you elaborate on that a bit as well?
Sure, Rodney. There's a story that came out a number of years ago that at some point during Jackie's career, we think it was early in his career, may not have been during his rookie year, he was on the road, might have been Cincinnati, might have been Philadelphia, might have been St. Louis. We don't really know the exact location. But Jackie was really hearing it from the fans.
Yes.
And he was hearing it from the other team. And he was hearing the bigotry, and he was hearing the racist insults. And it was getting to be a little bit too much for him. It was one of those times where it was overwhelming. And while they were both on the field, Pee Wee Reese kind of sensed that just by Jackie's body language, he wasn't doing so well. So Pee Wee came over from his position at shortstop and basically put his arm around Jackie and whispered some words of encouragement. We don't know exactly what he said, but he basically made it clear that, hey, I've got your back. We have supporters for you, your teammates here with the Dodgers. By then, Jackie was gaining far more acceptance from most, if not all, of his Brooklyn teammates. And that kind of helped Jackie get through that incident. Now, some historians have tried to claim that this incident never occurred. I believe that it did, principally because Jackie, in his own autobiography, which came out not that long before his passing, he talks specifically about this. I think one of the reasons why people question or refute the incident is because there's been difficulty in terms of when it happened. Was it his rookie year? Was it later on? Where it happened? Which of the road sites? Was it Crosley Field in Cincinnati? Was it St. Louis? Was it Philadelphia? Was it somewhere else? And I think because we've never been able to pin down exactly when it took place, where it took place, some people have taken that next step and said it never took place. I don't buy that. I don't see why Jackie would have made that up. And to me, if he wrote about it in his own autobiography that he approved, to me, I think it should be taken at face value that, yes, it did occur.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting, and I know movies, you know, can sometimes sort of exaggerate a point here or there. You know, you mentioned that you didn't know what might have been said, but I go back to the movie 42, and I remember this when he, in the movie now, put his arm around him. He said, "I've got a lot of relatives in those stands, and I want them to know who I am." You see, and again, I know as writers and as movie makers, we take liberties and we put words sometimes in the mouths of individuals, but in one sense, he was saying something about who he was as well. And I think it's captured in a most powerful way with the letter that you referenced from Carl Vinning. I mean, this is his writing. And this is a person who took the time. And I believe you said that he had been a fan for 20 years and had never written to a player necessarily. I mean, now, how many of us have been able to contain ourselves in that way? But he felt the need and the desire to write this letter. I think those stories are important because I think it's important for people of courage to know that when they stand, people of goodwill will stand with them. Now, it may not be, you know, a majority in any given moment, but the number grows, and over time it grows and grows and grows, because that's what change is all about.
Yeah.
Can you take a moment, you've written about a number of players, and you made the comment about how Jackie, more than any other player, and maybe even more than any other individual, really sort of stood at the center of that arena to, frankly, help America see its best and maybe be governed by the best angels of our nature, the better angels of our nature. When you reflect on what's happening today, right? Mm-hmm. How do you see Robinson's role then in his moment, in his generation, and the current moment that we have? And who are the P. Reeses? See, that's where I want to go with this. And who are the Carl M. Vining?
Well, in terms of baseball, the concern now is the number of African Americans playing the game. If you go back to 1986, 18% of the major league players were Black Americans.
Yes.
In recent years, that number is down to 7%. So it's fallen 11 percentage points in about 35 years. So that would be one of the concerns strictly in terms of baseball. I mean, there's obviously many other issues, and I'm sure Robinson would have had a lot of opinions on those things. And we can speculate as to what those opinions would have been. But in terms of baseball, he certainly would have liked to see much higher numbers than what we're seeing now. And that has been a concern. Getting more young Black athletes to play the game. There's so much competition from other sports, basketball, football, boxing, track and field, what have you. So many of our young Black athletes are turning away from baseball and not turning toward the game. And I think that's something that would cause Jackie concern. Probably it would also be a concern to him, the number of Black fans at games. He probably would not be happy with the relatively low numbers. And he would say, well, what do we need to do to make our game more appealing, especially to young fans, especially to young Black fans? And some have said, well, the game today is too slow, it's too stationary, there's not enough speed and excitement. Of course, those were things that Jackie Robinson, that was his whole game, or part of his game. His daring, his ability to steal bases, his ability to steal home, his aggressive manner of play, as well as his outstanding hitting, his versatility, his defensive skill. I think Robinson would probably look onto the fields today and say, I'd like to see a few more players, not necessarily with the talent. The talent is there, but I think he'd like to see more players playing in the style of play that he used. Aggressive, taking advantage of a defense that is not fully aware of what might happen, catching defenders by surprise, using his speed, using his aggressiveness. I think he'd probably like to see the game more in that area, as I think I would as well. So in terms of baseball, those might be some of the things that Jackie would want to see today in the game. Of course, moments, as you know, moments or days before he died in 1972, he talked about his desire to see a Black face managing a major league team.
Yes.
That would not come until 3 years later with Frank Robinson, player manager for the Cleveland Indians. I think, like a lot of us, Jackie, very impatient. He would want to see change and improvements right away. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. Baseball tends to be a conservative sport. It tends to move at a relatively slow rate. And I'm sure that would frustrate Jackie as well.
Yes, yes. Well, Bruce, maybe one more question, and then we're going to turn it back to Patrick to close things out for us. But the relationship between Jackie, say, and UCLA, do we know whether they ever may have given him an honorary degree or anything like that? And because you mentioned that he left early to go to work to provide for his family. Do we know anything about that relationship as we think about his time there?
I'm not sure if that was ever done. Certainly would have made some sense. I don't think there's much doubt that if he had gone back for a fourth year, he would have graduated. But I'm not certain if UCLA ever did do anything like that. They may have. It's just not something that I'm aware of. My understanding was that Jackie decided to leave after 3 years so that he could go into business, start making some money. He was concerned about some of the family needs and about financially supporting them. And then, of course, real world came in with World War II,
Right.
and he was enlisted in the Army, became a lieutenant. That ended up delaying his career in terms of the Negro Leagues. And of course, the color line ended up delaying his major league career. And that's why he didn't make his major league debut until the age of 28. But it's an interesting thing to look into in terms of how UCLA viewed what he did. It would not surprise me if they decided to give him an honorary degree, but I can't say one way for another whether that actually has occurred. I'd have to look into that further.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And, I'm so happy that the National Archives could work with you and the Baseball Hall of Fame to give us this 75th anniversary of Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color line, the color barrier in baseball. We're also very happy that we've got these many classes that we support. And I think one actually deals with Sharon Robinson's book. And just the information that we have at the archives and how it helps to tell the authentic and true story. And you've given some of that to us today, and we very much thank you. We've got to have you back, and we'll just leave it at that. And Patrick, I'll turn it back to you and to you and the staff with the foundation, the staff at the archives, our archivist, Dave Ferrio. We just really appreciate the wonderful leadership that's being provided. And I know that that the chairman of our foundation, Jim Blanchard, would want me to say thanks, Bruce, to you as well, and to everyone involved in making today's program possible.
Thank you, Rodney. It's been a pleasure and privilege to talk to you. I've really enjoyed it. Great pleasure on my part, and hope the folks have enjoyed it as well.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rodney and Bruce. Terrific insights, the history. It's an inspiration, obviously, to our audience. So I appreciate your time. Add my kudos. And as a reminder, Bruce mentioned it, and I think I mentioned it up at the top, that we do have a terrific featured document presentation at the National Archives right now. So come visit us in Washington to see that. If you can't make it to Washington, obviously, we have it available online. And if you like sports programming like this, hang on to your seat. This fall, the National Archives will open up a special exhibition called All American, the Power of Sports. I have a feeling the Hall of Fame will be back with us. We'll have more baseball and other sports programming, so stay tuned for that. That exhibition is going to open in September. So as we close things out, I have a few announcements. I want to thank our viewers from all over the United States. We had lots of folks from the DC metro area, Atlanta, Michigan, Colorado, Illinois, Ohio, New Jersey, Missouri, Nebraska, Connecticut, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Texas, California, Utah, and not shockingly, a few folks from New York. So I want to give a special thanks to our generous members, corporate supporters, and donors. If you'd like to become a member of the foundation, you can join today by visiting our website, archivesfoundation.org. Of course, I want to thank the foundation staff who make these programs happen with logistics, prep, promotion, our gurus, Val McVeigh, Liana Escalise, Ricardo Lee, and Mr. Baseball of the National Archives Foundation, Jim Dumas. As a reminder, the National Archives Museum is open to the public, but we are ticketed for entrance, so reserve a ticket. You can see here at recreation.gov. On view right now is Rightfully Hers, a special exhibition that explores women's suffrage and the march to the 19th Amendment, closing in April. And as I mentioned, the featured document leading up to April, open now and available until April, celebrating Jackie Robinson. If you didn't catch all that's happening, follow us on social media at Archives FDN or visit our website to sign up for our weekly emails. It's cold and rainy here in DC, and what a better thing to do on a dreary day but visit our online store at nationalarchivestore.org. You know what I'm going to say? We do have the best museum shop in DC and online. So whether it's baseball or sports, our presidential collection or cherry blossom collection, go get your shopping groove on. The National Archives is our nation's memory. What is past is prologue. Until next time, on behalf of the National Archives Foundation, thank you for joining us today.